we'll get started here. So welcome to the Michigan Academic Library Association OER Interest Group webinar. The title of the webinar is Inclusive Access, Friend or Foe, Digging into the Details the Publishers Leave Out. And we have with us today Cindy Domica of Nicollet College. But before we get started, I want to remind you that everyone who is registered for the Open Ed conference next week, how many of you guys are planning on attending that? Okay. If you do, we want to invite everybody to log into the OER IG Slack channel when you attend a session so that you can chat with your colleagues in this group while you watch the webinar. So I will put the link to join the Slack channel and also to log into the Slack channel if you've already joined. I will put those in the chat here pretty soon. So I want to introduce to you Cindy Domica. She is, I met Cindy at Open Ed a few years ago, I think, and our paths have crossed fairly often since that. Cindy is a lifelong public servant. She started in high school working for a public radio station, City Hall, and the police department. Then when she went to college, she started out as a work study at Nicollet College in Wisconsin, and then was hired full-time 24 years ago and has been there since. She has been the bookstore manager, which is one of the reasons I asked her to speak today, because she knows that side of things. And she is now the manager of open and instructional resources. And I asked her to give me a couple of interesting facts. And she said that she once thought about going into politics, but she has since repented of that. And the other interesting fact she gave me is that her grandparents owned a bar during Prohibition and sold alcohol to Al Capone and Dillinger. Cindy is happy to take questions in real time, so I'm going to monitor the chat for your questions, and I will just interrupt when it seems appropriate. And with that, I will turn this over to Cindy.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for asking me to talk today. This is my first Zoom talk, so bear with me. I think this is obviously going to be the new thing that we all do. So, and this is also my first time doing this on Zoom. We're not a Zoom school. We have this weird thing called Blue Jeans, which is similar, but so let me share my screen. Let me pick the right one. Is it working? Oh, I think so.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay. And it clicked through, but you know the title of the presentation. So we are going to talk about what publishers are calling inclusive access, but who am I? So Tina did a great job of introducing me. I am I've spent my entire life in higher education. Basically, I started out at Nicollet College as a work study. I did spend 5 years in our business office doing accounts payable and purchasing before I then got my arm twisted to move over to our bookstore, where I did spend 15 years. And the beautiful part about my college is that we are very student-centric. We've always put the student first at everything that we do. Obviously, when I was in the business office, there's really not a lot you can put student first at, but in the bookstore there is. So instead of putting profits first, we put the students first. And I learned a lot about being able to do that through being the bookstore manager. Our OER program actually started in our bookstore about 4 or 5 years ago. It didn't start through faculty. It didn't start through our library. It actually started through our bookstore. And the best part of working from home, as you can see, that is my dog Bert. He is a mix of Siberian Husky and Saint Bernard. He is my 140-pound coworker that usually lays next to me and snores during all of my meetings, because so far I have not found a topic that interests him where he will actually stay awake. So that is me and Bert. My other dog Diesel, which I hope you don't hear from today because he does like to chip in during meetings once in a while. But that's who I am. I really have found my passion when it comes to OER and open education. It has really exploded at our college past OER, which we will talk a little bit about during this. Granted, though, our main goal today is to talk about and educate about inclusive access. So first of all, I want to dig a little bit into the history of bookstores and textbooks so that you kind of get an understanding of where the publishers are coming from. This isn't to stick up for the publishers, but this is to give a little bit of history of where the publishers are coming from. When I first started in the bookstore, it was primarily new and used textbooks. And students primarily bought from the bookstore. That was their main outlet of where they got their textbooks. And publishers, once they sold a new textbook, they lost then out to the used bookstore market. We bought textbooks back through buyback, and then students bought the used textbooks. Then there's new and used textbooks, enter the internet, enter the Amazons, enter, the eBay, at the time it was eBays, there was like half.com, I think at the time, websites like that. So there was the student to student interaction or on the internet or through say Amazon. So publishers lost out to the used book market even more. Then publishers started adding things like CDs. Okay, I'm going to go back even a little bit further. Publishers started adding discs to their books so that students couldn't resell their books and they had to buy new. So that was how publishers started to try to chip back into the market, making sure that students had to buy new books. Then we had new, used, and rental books. So publishers lost out to the used book market and the rental program because students were shopping around for the cheaper books and they were taking advantage of the rental programs. So publishers started adding, now we get a little bit more into the computer age, and publishers started adding those horrible access codes to the books. Then they also started adding some ebooks. So they were starting to grab a little bit more of the market too with just the ebooks because it was cutting out the middleman of the bookstores. We still sold access codes and books, but ebooks they could also sell directly to students. Now what's really starting to hurt them is we've got the new used rental and we've got OER, which we all know is free to students. So students are shopping around and they're not having to buy, rent books at all. So what do publishers do? They're trying to reclaim the market again, and they're introducing inclusive access, forcing students to purchase the books from them. Some places are using bookstores as the middlemen, but basically the students are having to get the books directly from the publishers. So that's just a little bit of a historical timeline of how publishers have lost out of their share of the book market and how they're trying to reclaim that lost share. If we look at it from the perspective of any company and taking the word publisher and our students out of it, any company is going to do the same thing. If we look at, say, the movie market has tried to adapt. They've lost out on, blockbusters and all those things went out of business. They've put everything online trying to reclaim their market. So from a company perspective, you can understand it. But when we put students first and what's best for our students, nope, not going to happen. Also, I want to bring up the Higher Education Opportunities Act that was passed in 2008, and this is going to be important. In August 2008, the Higher Education Opportunities Act was passed, and it required campuses to implement practices that gave students access to textbook and course material information for their courses prior to the start of the semester, which meant we had to give students access. A lot of us did it through like our bookstores websites to the textbook information so that students had access to go out and shop for the best prices prior to the start of the semester. We couldn't hide that information. We couldn't deny that information. Students had to have access to that information to the best of our ability. So they had to have access to the textbook title, the textbook ISBN, and the prices. And created a big hubbub. And of course, publishers aren't happy about this because students have access to this. And now they can go shop around and not buy from the bookstore. They can buy obviously from Amazon or wherever, or borrow from their friends or however they wanted to, share books, whatnot. And it was an effort to increase transparency and allow students to shop around. So this is important because this is also now becoming a problem because there isn't that transparency anymore with the inclusive access. So now let's talk about the inclusive access programs. I've always laughed about the inclusive access because of the word inclusive. And when I looked up the word inclusive, it says definition, according to Merriam-Webster, include everyone. If we reflect upon that, yeah, I guess it does include everyone because you are forcing everyone to buy your book. So, okay, we can sit and debate that, but true to Merriam-Webster's definition, it does include everyone. I've also heard these programs called equitable access, auto billing, first day access. I think Follett has their own variation of this program. Barnes and Noble has their own variation of this program. So these are called a variety of different names. So how does it work? The most simplistic way of how it works is a student signs up for a class. The course material costs have already been added to the cost of their class. And then the students get access to the material when the course opens up in the LMS. So if you're looking at the most simplistic way this works, it sounds great. So why is this bad? Okay, so let's break it down. What does this mean for students? When the student signs up for the class, they can't find out what the materials are being used for, what materials are being used for the class. So I personally have gone to sign up for a class, and that's all it says is your materials will be delivered to you in the LMS the day of the class. I have no idea what materials they are. You can't find out. You can't go to the bookstore's website to find out what they are because there's nothing listed. So even if I wanted to shop around to potentially, if I wanted to opt out, I don't know what these materials are. So according to the Higher Education Opportunities Act, is my opinion, is being broken. The course material costs have already been added to the course. Well, unless you know what the actual course was prior to, the cost of the course was prior to, you don't know what those course material costs are. Working prior to in the business office, I knew what those course costs were. And unless you're paying attention as a student, you don't know what those course costs are to know what the material courses are. How many of our students are really actually paying attention to those things? And then students get access to materials when the course opens up in the LMS. We can go into a variety of reasons why our students want and or need those materials prior to the first day of course. A lot of our students, and I know it's working in the bookstore, want those materials because they need that extra time to start preparing for those courses. The material is more difficult. They may have some sort of learning need that they need to actually prepare for those classes before. Some of our students work with disability support services, so they need to start preparing with them to get the materials read or whatnot. So for a variety of reasons, our students need access to those materials prior to the first day of courses. This is only the beginning. Students can't, like I said, shop around. They can't share. A lot of our students like to sell their books back at the end of the term. They can't do that. This is a time-bound thing. They can't keep those books. They're not guaranteed a physical textbook if they need one, and they may have to repurchase if they're retaking a course. So what about opting out? So by law, they have to have the opportunity to opt out of a inclusive access material. I have a link, and I'll share a link to this entire slide deck at the end, and there's a report that the US PIRG put out about automatic textbook billing report, and I do encourage everybody to take a look at it. But according to the US PIRG, 42% of institutions signed at least one contract that put limitations on the publicity around these partnerships, which could potentially allow the publisher to veto any campus marketing materials that would inform students and faculty about program value or how to opt out, which means students aren't being informed about the option to opt out, how to opt out. And I've also heard anecdotally about the difficulty it is to actually opt out of these programs. So students aren't opting out, and there's a very short window to actually opt out of these programs. A lot of students don't typically purchase their textbooks until they find out how much that textbook is actually being used in that course. And these opt-out are usually around 7 days. So if the student is trying to figure out if they actually need that textbook for that course, 7 days is not enough time for them to do that. Print copies. So we just talked about print copies. I put a map in here, the Nicolay College District map, so you can kind of see where I'm from. I'm up in northern Wisconsin, which is a very rural area. And I'm sure everybody here is kind of scattered about Michigan, which can be very rural, especially, I don't know if anybody here is actually from the UP, but it's very rural, and our internet is very, very poor. So print copies are extremely important here, just based on our internet access. And that's not talking about students who prefer print, who need print for their learning preference maybe. There's a variety of reasons why somebody may need a print copy. But according to the US PIRG report, 1/5 of automatic billing contracts limit the number of students who can actually purchase print versions. Now think about the students who lose out of purchasing a print copy and why. Students who may not have the money up front to actually, to buy those print copies. It's disproportionately going to be those students who can afford to, who get those print copies. But it's cheaper. It's cheaper. These programs are cheaper. Again, according to the US PIRG, nearly half the automatic billing contracts they reviewed fail to disclose their discount structure. 33% of contracts had annual uncapped price increases, and 21 had the percent for twice annual price increases. 68% had a clause where the discount could be eliminated, reduced, or the contract canceled for a missed quota. And if the quota could be as high as 90% of the course. So then what happens if the contract is canceled? Who's going to eat the rest? Who's going to eat the cost of that class? And when we talk about cheaper, so great, the student is forced to pay $40 for that book. But what if they could have found it on the internet cheaper? What if they could have borrowed it from a friend? What if they really only are using it for 1 or 2 modules in a course? Is it really cheaper for that student? We're not even talking OER yet. We're just talking if they really are using a traditional publisher textbook. So is it really cheaper for these students? Okay, so the whole time we're talking about this, I'm sure I'm talking to an OER group. So you're thinking there's got to be a better option for our students, since students are going to be the center of our conversation. So obviously we're talking OER. So what can we do? So we need to get our talking points ready on this. So what I did is I copied in my slide from before when we talk about students. So students can't shop around for inclusive access. With OER, they don't need to. It's free. Students can't share with inclusive access. Well, with OER, it's one of the 5 R's. Students can't sell it back with inclusive access. Well, it was free. What's there to sell back? Students can't keep it with OER. It was one of the 5 R's. With inclusive access, students are not guaranteed a physical textbook. Okay, well here, not OER are available to be printed, many are. And we can also work to make those that are not available to be printed available to be printed. That's one of the things I've worked on here at Nicolay College, is to convert those that are not available to be printed into, like, we've got press books. I've copied them into press books into our version so that it can be printed. Well, again, may have to repurchase if taking a course. Yep, nope, you already get to keep it as one of the 5 R's. So these are some of the great talking points when we talk inclusive access versus OER. There's easy counterpoints right there to counter those. Not to mention all of the other benefits of OER. And since, again, I'm talking to a OER group, we all know those. We know about the adapting of them. We know about all of those things that are benefits to not only the students, we know their benefits to faculty. We've got those all in our back pocket that we can bring out at any time to talk to them about. But what about the added value that publishers bring? All of those things, interactive activities. Yeah, well, no, guess what? H5P is exploding out there. If you haven't heard about H5P, I would recommend looking into it. Great examples, and I've got a link to eCampus Ontario's hub of H5P activities. There are a ton of them out there. They are wonderful, and you can download them into your own and customize them. H5P is working on their own hub where people from all over can contribute to it. And they're just like activities that you would find that publishers do. Assessments. This is where you can talk to someone in teaching and learning and in instructional design. And I see Autumn's here. So she can also, this is something I've been working on a lot lately. I've been moved from our bookstore into our teaching and learning and been working with faculty to start building OER courses. So talk about, rethinking your assessments. Why are we giving multiple choice tests? Why are we, are they the best way to really assess our students' learning? But if you really, really, really feel strongly about those multiple, choice tests, have the students create the assessments, start talking about open pedagogy. Same with video. There's thousands of videos out there. Create your own to help humanize the courses. I've worked with an instructor recently on our business law class to create an OER course. They help humanize the course. Have students create videos as an assessment, and have them create content and then add those videos to your next iteration of courses. These are all things that the added value that the publishers bring. It's not about the publishers. Have the students help create the content. They're the ones that can help bring the added value to the courses. They don't need to be paying for it. You can help weave it in with assessment and things like that. Those are the things that added value really means, and it means more to the students than what the publishers can bring. So these are just kind of things you can help put in your back pocket when you're talking to faculty about inclusive access. One last thing, and I didn't put a slide in here about it too, is, and Tina brought this up about the surveillance, is we are also now, when you're talking inclusive access, we are selling our students' data to the publishers every single time we sign a contract with them. You are selling, depending on your class size, anywhere from 20 to 100 students' data to the publishers. And that adds up quickly. And we have to be very mindful that we're doing that. It's something I feel strongly about, and I don't know how to get faculty to feel strongly about that. Some do. But they are now taking that data and they are exploiting that data. and we need to be mindful about our students' privacy, and I want to say be a gatekeeper for them, because they don't necessarily know the repercussions of that. We've had several data breaches when it comes to the publishers. And as long as the students are under our care, I think that we need to do that for them. So I am willing to take questions from people.
There was one question in the chat, Cindy, early on, asking about, is Nicollet Bookstore independent, Barnes and Noble?
We are independent. Thankfully, we are independent.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a question. I don't know if you know this, but you said that only a percentage of the students can buy a book with the contracts. Why do they do that?
So every college negotiates their own contracts with the publishers. It costs money for publishers to print books. Publishers they're leaning away towards print books. They don't want to do them anymore. And that's one thing I did. They're trying to go all digital, kind of like, so Pearson has come out and said that they are trying to go all digital, and they're doing very few print books, and that they are going to make their print books very expensive, so that people don't, which is terrible. But they are going to go all digital, and they are going to make very few print books and make their print books very expensive. So they don't want to do print books. It costs them more money to do that. So every school has, and the US PIRG report does have examples of some contracts in there, but every school, so I'd like to talk about contracts, but every school can negotiate their own contract. So depending on what the school negotiates is how much can be in there. So I don't know if they negotiate, yes, more can order print if it's more expensive because the company doesn't want to do print, or how that works. I don't know. I'm afraid for our learners, and like, depending obviously on your school, like our school population, our demographic, we have a lot of older learners. I don't want to say older because they're not like 30, like in their 30s. So they're still not as comfortable with digital as like our straight out of high school learners. They're a little bit more comfortable, but even they are still requesting print textbooks. And you don't want to take that opportunity away from them.
I stopped your screen share so we can all see.
Oh.
So I have a question, and I think these are librarians. Most of us are librarians, and we. I always had trouble navigating the structure, the institutional structure, and it's not like we have any way to affect contracts that the college signs with publishers. Any clues on where, is there a crack there somewhere that we can get in? And, I feel like all of these decisions are being made in rooms we don't have access to. And yet we have important information that could inform those decisions. Who makes those decisions?
I think it starts with building the relationships with the faculty. And I think that if the faculty, because it comes down to who determines what books are being used in your classes. In a lot of places, the faculty are still the ones that are making those decisions. And if the faculty is the one that wants to use OER, then they can't be forced to use an inclusive access textbook, which then, it has to be the faculty saying, I want to use you know, McGraw-Hill's X book. I want this contract, or I want to use Pearson's X book that, you know, I want this contract. So I think it's building those relationships with faculty so the faculty can say, no, I'm using, you know, OER for my classes. And I think it's educating faculty on the benefits of OER and the downfalls, the pitfalls of these other programs so that they don't even look at them. So that when they are approached by the you know, the sales reps from these companies who are coming in and they're waving these beautiful things in front of them saying, oh, this is so great and you're going to gain so much and we've got all these shiny bells and whistles that come along, which is what they do, and that's their jobs. I mean, to be fair, that's their jobs, to wave these bells and whistles at these saying, oh, but we've got all these great analytics that go with it and you can do all these wonderful things and your students will have these great quizzes and da 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 da. It's the faculty be like, yeah, no, I can take this book and I can only use 2 chapters and I can do this and I can create these own learning objects, and no, I'd rather do this and tailor my course to my class.
I could say at our campus, the discussion was happening at the administration level. Like the bookstore manager was talking with the provost and everybody else without us knowing, even though the bookstore manager was on my affordability team. I think she was on our side, but there was other things going on there. But what I found, it got cut down before I even got brought into the conversation, which was good to hear. But I think part of why that happened is that I had previously talked with people on our campus when I was a Spark OER fellow, and I had met with people who didn't expect for me to meet with them. So I met with the chief diversity officer and talked about this OER thing. He's like, why are you talking to me about this? But I had just, you know, talked, and then I also had met with the student success person who was directly appointed by the provost. So these people that I had talked to and talked about these issues with, who were kind of in that room, had heard these things. And they didn't know what exactly it meant, but they knew it meant something, you know, because I had talked to them previously. And so I didn't realize how helpful that those conversations have been. And I'm going to continue to try to have those conversations with those people who tend to be in these high-level administrative rooms, so they understand that there is a reason to bring in other people to the conversation. Luckily for us, our lawyers up in the council office are very not easy to get things through, and so they killed it, which was a good thing.
Yep.
But it is going to come back, and I know. So I just felt like if anybody else has those opportunities to have conversations with those other people, they did turn out to be very fruitful for me, even though I hadn't realized it at the time.
Yeah, I would also make sure to always center the student, and always pivot back to the student and making sure that it's hard for them to admit that they're doing something against the student. They can say that they're doing it for their own bottom dollar, but they can't, it would be hard for them to admit they're doing it for their own bottom dollar over the benefit of a student. I can't imagine them coming out and saying that.
Kendra has a question in the chat. Are institutions required to spell out the purpose of the fee, of the inclusive access fee in registration, or do some charge it as a technology fee?
I think you would want to check with your state on that. So we're pretty, Nicolay belongs to Wisconsin Technical College System, and it's pretty specific on what you can and cannot, like what you can charge, like under material fee or course fees. We're prescribed by state what we have to charge a certain amount, like for tuition fees and whatnot. We cannot change that. It's set by the governor. So I would check with your state on that. I think each state's going to vary. That's definitely going to be a state question. I would check with the state on that.
So my college doesn't have inclusive access exactly where it's like the student, it's an automatic opt-in, the student has to opt out. But we do have Cengage Unlimited, where the student can purchase like a semester, a year's worth of access to their Cengage textbooks. And I'm interested in what you had said about student data.
Mhm.
So do you know like what information is being collected or any of that kind of thing? Is it like the same kind of information that would be collected for like an LMS, or is it even like more personal information?
So it all depends. So I've signed up for Cengage Unlimited. Is a fake account. Um, I signed up for it. Well, I signed up for it with like our department so that when faculty have questions, when it first came out, so when faculty had questions, I could go in and I could figure it out. So that's why I call it a fake account. But here's the thing, I would go in and I would read the terms of the privacy policy and the terms of service. And I've really, over like the last 2 years, oh my gosh, I've probably spent days upon days of reading all of these things, of all of the things that they can collect on you. And so they're collecting the information, and it depends on how they're doing it. And if they're signing up directly through Cengage, and some of them are having you sign up through your LMS, if it's an LTI, we refuse to connect our LMS to Cengage because of the information passed. And that's one of the things I think that's we've started is really looking at the connections we have like to our LMS, but we refuse to connect Cengage to our LMS. But if you read the terms and policies, so they are collecting, you know, their names and addresses and all of that stuff, but then they're also doing it, they're selling it to third parties. And then if a student gets a print copy, they have to go to Chegg to get their print copy through Chegg. So now you're sending them to another third party, and Chegg just had like a 40 million student data breach with like the last year or so. So it's like this big spider web of you know. So that's why I say we have to be mindful, because you've got it's like the spider web of where we're all sending them. And there are students, so we have to like, and do you really want to read terms of service for like 50 different of all of these different places? So yeah, and they're you know, they've got access to all of their content and the things that they created, and then who's the ownership of that, and things like that. And Cengage Unlimited, you know, is another one. Yes, they have access to all of their library, but it's a time-based subscription as well.
Thank you.
And it seems like it's only really worthwhile if you have multiple courses that are using Cengage books. And what are the odds?
And that's through our bookstore, that when it first came out, it was very time consuming, but I was almost having individual consultations with students going, okay, you are in this program, you are only going to have 2 Cengage books, and you're only going to have them first semester and fourth semester. I don't recommend getting this, because you can either get a used, it was like, that was like almost individual consultations. And that was with students that came in. It's hard to have those consultations with students who are just looking at their book lists online. So it's very hard for students now. It's very confusing.
So another question in the chat: as a former bookstore manager, do you have any recommendations for trying to work with our bookstore managers on this issue, and including third-party bookstores?
I think most bookstore managers are open. It's hard because I know a lot of bookstores, I'm going to be honest, are under that pressure to make money, or break even. And I think there can be a compromise with it. I think it's just building, and it might be building slowly that line of communication and having those conversations and trying to figure out how to do it the best for the student. Because that's what we're trying to do, is what's best for the student and make sure the student's successful. And it might be small. It might be starting out small and just having small conversations about how can we work together to do this, and just take maybe little pieces and find little pieces that you can work together on and build off of that. Just build building blocks, just little projects even to do that. Because there's got to be common ground, even with third parties. I'm extremely lucky. I admit that I'm extremely lucky that we are independent and student centered. And I know working with third parties are extremely frustrating from the conversations I've had, but there's got to be little building blocks that you can come up with, even if it's something as small as, I want to say start out small with like going out to lunch. Well, we can't do that now, but someday when we can go out to lunch again, or just, and maybe having conversations about common problems and find one that you can maybe solve together. I think just because everybody has complaints and everybody has problems, and if you find one that you can maybe have an opportunity to work on together, I think that even if you think it's the smallest that don't have any meaningful outcomes, it's going to have a meaningful outcome that you're building a relationship together. I think that would be a good start.
Cindy, I totally hear that. I think relationships are so powerful, but I'm wondering, do you think it's feasible to have some kind of institutional policy that basically says, like, we will not sign these contracts? We will not use or endorse materials that require students to participate against their will, or something like that.
I think that's an awesome goal. I really do. I think if you can pull that off, I think that would be a model to definitely send out to like larger groups, if you can come up with a policy for that. Especially if you can institute reasoning behind it. And if you can come up, and there's plenty of reasoning behind coming up with alternatives, because a lot of people are using it to advance their affordable textbook programs. They're calling it obviously affordable alternatives. And theoretically it is an alternative, but it's just not the right one. And you can come up with better ones, and there are plenty. I think that would be amazing.
Another question in the chat from Deb at GVSU. Do Barnes & Noble or Follett have ties to the big inclusive access publishers that an independent bookstore might not?
I don't know. Because you've got Barnes & Noble and you've got Follett, and then the big inclusive access ones are like your Pearson and Cengage and McGraw-Hill. Besides them just being big players in both fields, I don't know if they actually have any ties together.
I'd be interested to know if any of you have had experience with faculty choosing to use one of these programs. Anybody had to try to talk anybody out of it?
So I'm not sure I've had experience specifically with exclusive access, but so much of inclusive access reminds me, the business model of it reminds me of other educational technologies that market themselves as like subscription based. I'm thinking of stuff like Top Hat, right? And now everybody has to buy a license to be able to participate in class because we're using some type of subscription based polling system. Top Hat also does sell textbooks. So, you know, they're kind of like this multi-armed thing. And it is really difficult, right? Especially if I can't tell you how many times I've been talking to somebody and they're like, oh, but the salesperson told me X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, of course they told you that. They're trying to sell you this product, right? So I think that there's a lot of overlap. Cindy's right. It is it's their job. It's the salespeople's jobs to, you know, try to sell their product. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to fight a sales pitch with you know, just good pedagogy or good design. It depends on how much they've bought into it. And a big important thing is that you can give them some type of alternative. And that's why OER is so important, right? Because now, well, okay, if I'm not going to do this thing, what is it that I am going to do? Well, there's actually, you know, an OER already created for that. And it's got, you know, everything that you're looking for. So yeah, that's the closest I can get. Anybody else?
I guess I would say that Barnes and Noble at least is like directly in the game themselves. They don't need to like go to any of the big publishers to do this model because they're already doing it. I think Follett also has a version that they basically, and they have a direct line to faculty as well. So I know on our campus, Barnes and Noble talks directly to faculty. They push stuff to them. They give them the hard sell and it sounds good, and they use OER. They specifically say that their stuff is OER, but then they basically sell it on their platform, which does all the things we talked about, right? Like it requires students to pay a fee to get access to the platform. It gives them access to all the student data. It gives them access to all the content created on the platform, and they own the copyright to all of that. So it's not just the big publishers that are doing this, like it's the bookstore operators themselves who are complicit and actively engaged in these practices. And of course, these textbook publishers won't sell to libraries, most of them.
Right.
So we don't have an alternative method for distribution of these materials. And that means that we don't have much of a voice in the process either.
Thank you. That is good information to have.
Yeah, Barnes and Nobles has a concierge service for OER that they're pushing. So they'll basically be your concierge for developing your OER course. And we had one of our faculty who was doing OER already. She kind of tested it out just to see and walked away very frustrated with it. But, you know, you can't see it, you know, they don't let you see anything. So we had to send somebody into the weeds to figure it out. And that they're advertising to the faculty that this is OER and we can put this course together and you don't have to do any work. We'll do it for you. So that's been interesting. The thing that we have found on our campus is that the students are the largest voice for not liking those access codes, and they came to us. I had a student in the Honors College who wanted to do his thesis on it. So he was doing his thesis on access codes, and he wasn't connected with the student government, which I then connected him with because they've already started on that route. And so they took it to, they made a resolution in front of the board of trustees. So coming from the students who are saying these access codes are killing us was more than me talking to the faculty. And so they're still pushing that. They've now passed it on to the third student Congress who's taken this as their initiative to at least get some relief on it. I think the faculty it falls on deaf ears if I say to them, you know, you're giving students access codes and they don't own anything. So It's good to continue to let the students, they put together a video and everything, and I keep using that when I try to talk to the people who care more about this, listening to the students, than they do to me.
I want to call attention to Julia put a link in the chat to a Medium article. Billy Meinke is somebody who has been writing about this, about data collection and surveillance. And so you might want to, before the meeting's over, open that tab and save it so that you can read it later.
Yeah, I can share the video. The video is just about OER in general, not about access codes, but I can share the student video. They didn't do a good job of showing it themselves, so I keep trying to share it.
Okay, one last call for questions here.
I just did put the link to the presentation in the chat, which will then also link to the US PERG report. And then there's a couple other links in there as well for some additional information.
Cindy, the
Okay.
link is not resolving for me. It's saying that I don't have access for Google. Or did you want that? Did you want us to send a request?
No. Should work.
Is it just me? Anybody else getting that? When I get like a thing that says you need to request access. The link to the presentation.
Yeah, me too.
Well, maybe you can figure that out and Tina can send it out in a follow-up.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay, now it should work, I think.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
Perfect.
thank you so much for this, Cindy. I learned a lot, and it was so nice just to have it all laid out like that, especially the history and just to hear somebody talk about it with with authority, somebody who knows, who are confident, because it's also squishy and it's also, you know, people are invested in hiding this information. And so the more we know, the more we can talk about it with confidence, the more effect we can have on it. So thank you so much. It was great.
Well, and I thank all of you for taking your time this morning. I know it's been a very long week, so I do appreciate all of you taking your time this morning to join me in taking time to listen. And I do thank all of you also for all of the work that you have all done to advancing OER and for our students and for just everybody in general. So I do appreciate it all. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Be sure to get the links from the chat if you need them for the Slack channel for next week. And have a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Bye.